Our next speaker is Dr. Jessica Hood, who is an artist who's interested in art history and theory, architecture and the history of sites. Jessica works at the Art History and Art Theory Department at Monash University and is a member of the National Management Committee of the Garden History Society. Jessica's PhD looked at the sites and collections of the Adelaide Botanic Gardens, including a significant series of tree photographs dating from the 1920s, which leads to her topic this afternoon, the Australian tree portrait. Please welcome Jessica.
Thanks, John. So, my paper today will consider the photographic representation of the tree. So I guess in quite a different way than perhaps others have considered the tree today. So it is informed by my PhD research, which was titled Garden Archive, Photographic Relation and Exchange. So this was a fine art PhD and so consisted of practice-led research. So Garden Archive used the Botanic Gardens of Adelaide as a primary site of research and situated a series of photographic exchanges extending from and kind of, I guess, within that site as well as extending from it. So a major component of the research was an exhibition at the Santos Museum of Economic Botany, which I'll show you some photos of later in the paper. So the main focus of my paper today, however, will not be that kind of outcome of the research, but rather a reflection on the issues of retrieval and reception that an archive of tree portraits presented to me. So in this way, I'll be thinking more about a condition of the archive and the photographic representations of the tree, and I guess those extend to the tree itself. And I'll be posing the following questions. What were the conditions that led to the production of these photographs? How might we view these photographs as these portraits in the present, and how might we revalue these portraits both for the trees they represent and as photographic objects and images in their own right. So I'm in no way suggesting that I have the answers to these questions, and indeed they may not ever be answered. But however, I do view the posing of these questions as interesting points of departure, as potential problems to be conceptualised through an art practice. And for me, that is kind of part of their value and perhaps quite different from some of the other kind of economic or ecological values that we've looked at today. So this is the main collection that I was working with in Garden Archive. So the collection I was working with specifically was 67 black and white glass-mounted transparencies, or lantern slides, and they were all portraits of trees, as you will see. And most of them were taken, I believe, in the Adelaide Botanic Gardens. So each of these slides are approximately kind of 82 millimetres square and a few millimetres thick. So I will always kind of present them as their objects. I think they're really important that they're photographic objects, not just images. So a lantern slide is a glass slide made for projection and is, I guess, a precursor to the 35 millimetre. So this is the kind of beautiful lantern slide, projector or object that they would have been projected through. This is a projector I admire each week when I volunteer at the Botanic Gardens at Melbourne. So most of this particular collection that I'm speaking about today were found in a simple repurposed box in the archives of the Adelaide Botanic Gardens. This box contained one notebook and a series of 26 smaller boxes, such as this one. So the kind of box that these kind of lantern slides would have been bought in before they were exposed, or this one, that complete with the conditions and chemistry required for producing these portraits. So I refer to this collection as the Black and White Tree series, and I guess this is a kind of a title of convenience created by me in order to refer to them collectively as a group. And as you'll see, the notation system which I've used to title each image is again some sort of title of convenience for me, one produced so that I could locate and refer to these photographs without the specificity of naming the tree and the issues that might come along with that. As you've noticed, I'm not a botanist, nor claim to be. So this naming instead was formulated by that slide's physical position within the confines of the archive itself. So here being box 1, so the first box I pulled out of the box, and number 5, so it was 5 deep in that box. So really quite pragmatic decisions, I guess. So throughout my investigations, I was told that this box was recently returned to the Adelaide Botanic Gardens by the Lothian family. Now, Noel Lothian was a director of the gardens between 1948 and 1980. He was an avid photographer and produced thousands of photographs during his directorship. So also held in the Adelaide Botanic Gardens are a series of lantern slides he took during his time at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew before World War II. So as Richard Aiken notes in his 2006 History of the Gardens, Seeds of Change, such lantern slides would have been used in his illustrated lectures and were therefore a resource that sustained his role as an educator for many years. So this box in which I found the Black and White Tree series certainly reflected that and was composed of hundreds of other slides. So although found within the archives of the Adelaide Botanic Gardens, the Black and White Tree series were mixed with a series of other photographs from other botanic gardens such as Christchurch and Kew, and other isolated photographs of foliage and flowers. They therefore did not immediately assure me that they had been taken in the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site. So one photograph was labelled ABG, so Adelaide Botanic Gardens, as you can just make it out right at the top of the slide there. While another was, it has Bot Park on it, so referring to Botanic Park, which is the gardens surrounding parkland. And that image is watch out for it a little later on. But nowhere other than in the content of the photographs themselves did these images recognise the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site. So my familiarity with the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site was kind of projected onto these photographs in a way. And some of the photographs featured landmarks, such as the main gates. If anyone knows the Adelaide Botanic Gardens, I'm sure they'll recognise this image. And others had the Museum of Economic Botany building, which you can see right in the bottom corner there, or in a similar spot, but on the other side. So that you can see that eucalypt that's pictured here in the background of this photo. So it was the presence of these landmarks, along with the two inscribed references to the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site, that led me to believe that all of these photographs were a tree specifically within, or once within, the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site. So I began a slow and careful consideration of the site in search of the trees and the locations of these photographs. And of course, there was no assurance that these trees and the locations I was searching for existed in the same configuration, if even at all. So I was dealing with a strange sensation of having the tree repeat itself in my memory and looking at the photograph of the tree and sensing it was the same one that I'd previously seen, on the site. And so this experience was not, unique to me. During my tracing of these trees onto the site of the gardens, staff from the gardens, particularly horticultural staff, through their intimacy with the trees in the gardens, frequently directed me towards a specific tree or relayed a possible existing or past position for each given photographed tree. And this was kind of based on the same kind of process of memory. And so each person I spoke to then drew from his or her memory as it mapped out the tree represented in the photograph. So these photographs enacted an internal experience of the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site, and this was an experience that wasn't necessarily able to be realised within the site itself. So based on the dress of some of the figures included in the series, they would also appear to predate Lothian's directorship by at least 20 years. So you can see the figure with the top hat right in the bottom here. It's very small. And indeed, this was proven as I found reproductions of these images in annual reports dating back to around 1918. So although gathered together with these teaching slides, it is likely that these portraits were produced sometime before and they were therefore inherited by Noel Lothian along with his directorship of the garden. So what were the conditions that led to the production of these photographs? And this is a question that's troubled me since my first encounter with these photographs, and I've never really found any direct evidence in the garden's archives that points to an answer to that question. But what I think I could think about was the purpose that they were put to. and thinking more about what are their documentary value, other than the documentary values in the annual reports, how did these photographs circulate? So one possibility that was pointed out to me by Tony Canellos at the Botanic Gardens was that these photographs may in fact have been commissioned by a governmental agency outside of, but nonetheless connected to the Botanic Gardens. And therefore they may have had multiple uses, both within the Botanic Gardens itself and also for kind of more general tourism. But regardless of this question concerning the initial commissioning of these photographs, the extent of the collection, 67 in total, and the exactitude with which kind of technically these photographs were produced ascribes, at least for me, a value for these photographs beyond their documentary. And my own practice, in a way, speaks to this possibility, and I will return to this. So there are two ways in which we might think about the circulation of these images at the time in which they were produced. The first is by looking at similar images produced and published at a similar time. So one key example of this is William Guilfoyle's book published in 1911, Australian Plants Suitable for Gardens, Parks, Timber Reserves. So as the illustrations list here demonstrates, some 300 images were reproduced in this book, all of which are photographs. And as you can see, there's a clear relationship between the black and white tree series in Adelaide and those included in Guilfoyle's book. This is probably not surprising. After all, the profile view of the tree is arguably a pragmatic choice, objectively recording its shape, size, and general appearance for the reader of this book. Yet, why privilege photography in this way? In fact, why use photography at all? Over, say, botanic drawing, which would arguably have translated more scientifically accurate information. In other words, what ends does the photograph play in recording and translating these views, these trees to the viewer? It presents the general appearance of the tree, one which is usually in a botanic garden setting. And I was kind of thinking about this, David, when you were speaking, about thinking about the characters of trees and mapping those based on their visual representation. So these are, I guess, representations of the tree that privilege the space of the botanic garden, the scientific spacing and organisation of its trees, the spacing and organisation that allows us to view each tree in isolation, yet also in its relationship to others that surround it. And again, this is not surprising, given that this book was produced at the end of Guilfoyle's directorship at the Melbourne Botanic Gardens. So as Eve Armand notes regarding this book in her entry on Guilfoyle in the Oxford Companion to Australian Gardens, in his final work, Guilfoyle here drew on his considerable horticultural experience and helped promote the use of native plants in private and public domains. Guilfoyle's promotion of Australian trees for use in the private and public gardens and reserves in this book is, for me, produced not only through his descriptions, but by the photographic images he uses to illustrate them. For these photographic representations of trees refer us to the haptic, to the experiential aspects of these trees and the settings in which they are pictured. It describes a genre of the tree portrait, that is not necessarily about scientifically describing the tree, but rather pointing to its experiential possibilities within the space of the garden itself. So another circulation of these tree portraits, particularly the black and white tree series from Adelaide, is their use within correspondence. So in 2012, I investigated a series of dialogues between the Adelaide Botanic Gardens and the Kew Botanic Gardens. And for this research, I was kind of thinking about Kew as the model for establishing botanic gardens in Adelaide, but also in Australia, and thinking about the organisational structure of this, which is involved with, but not limited to, the documentation and scientific collection of plants, both within and extending from its site. So it is within these conditions, the archive of tree portraits and the black and white tree series, recording the trees within the site of the Botanic Gardens in Adelaide, were produced. So this photographic production was not centred exclusively on recording the arrangement of the garden for future generations, but was also utilised in the time of its production as a means by which to relate the successes of the Botanic Gardens of Adelaide's endeavours to other coexisting sites, such as the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. So while investigating this correspondence file between Adelaide and Kew Botanic Gardens, I came across a letter dated 10th of June 1931, a letter between directors John F. Bailey of the Botanic Gardens of Adelaide and Arthur W. Hill of the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. This letter reads as follows: Dear Mr. Bailey, I'm very much obliged for the parcel of beautiful photographs of trees in the Botanic Gardens of Adelaide, which Mr. Hubbard handed to me on his return to Kew a few days ago. The photograph of yourself, included in the package, is being mounted for our collection of portraits of botanists. With many thanks for this useful gift, yours sincerely, Arthur W. Hill. So it's probably important to note here, I hadn't actually found these photographs at this point, but rather this letter points me towards them. So it became immediately apparent that the photographs referred here were potentially the black and white tree series, which I had been looking at in Adelaide. And so upon asking to view these photographs, it transpired that the location within the organisation of Royal Botanic Gardens Kew was a mystery. I was told, and it was evident, that photographic material was normally separated from correspondence and was unlikely to have been held in the archives of which the correspondence was a part. In some instances, photographs were passed on to the Museum of Economic Botany, these now being held by the illustrations team. Here, also, accounting for photographic material was an issue, as there were a number of ways in which they may have been catalogued. The photographs may have been filed under the location of the Botanic Garden, or perhaps according to the taxonomic rank, in which only the tree names would make it possible to find them. However, the presence of the John F. Bailey portrait supplied alongside these photographs implied that the other tree photographs would be somewhere in the collections at Kew. So an initial test by the illustrations assistant under eucalyptus in the Museum of Economic Botany produced no results, but perhaps they might be in the collections of the herbarium. So I proceeded to provide a list and the images of significant Australian trees that were identified in the black and white tree series. And this was based on the assumption that if Bailey were to send photographs back with a visitor from Kew, surely they would be Australian trees not able to grow there, or of which the Kew Botanic Gardens had no mature specimen. So this proved successful, and 12 printed reproductions of the black and white tree series were found. This complicated process of locating these tree portraits draws attention to a common archival issue with photographs, particularly within the 19th and early 20th century. Where do they belong? For it seems that within the organisation of Kew, no department was willing to take responsibility for them, and this is an issue expressed to me on numerous occasions. They are photographs, not illustrations. So in this case, they're not botanical illustrations, nor were they considered art objects in their own right, another key attribute to the illustrations team. Likewise, they were not artefacts, such as those collected for the purposes of economic botany, nor scientific in nature, such as the dried pressed specimens of the herbarium. So where is it that these photographs belong? What does it say about the value of the photographs themselves? So of the 12 photographic prints of the black and white tree series found at Kew, 5 of the photographs were not found in my initial search at the Adelaide Botanic Garden site. So here, the issue of locatability, spoken to earlier, where I was trying to find these trees within the gardens itself, it was shifted to, and now was about the retrieval of the photograph itself. So interestingly, this shift occurs at a remove from the site of the garden itself, and is rather based on the use value of these photographs during the time of their production. So how might we view these photographic portraits in the present? What might be value about these portraits, both for the trees they represent and as the photographic objects and images in their own right? So the condition highlighted here is that of an unknown place of belonging in the archive for these photographic tree portraits, and leads me to thinking about the archival condition itself. So informing our understanding of this here is Sven Spekker's book, The Big Archive, Art from Bureaucracy, which was published in 2008. In this book, Specker considers modernist art practice, as well as late 20th century installation practices, to formulate how the bureaucratic archive shaped art practice. One of his key contentions is, and I quote here, "Archives do not record experience so much as its absence. They mark the point where an experience is missing from its proper place. And what is returned to us in an archive may well be something we never possessed in the first place. Is there a part of the archive that escapes from the archivist's control, a beyond the archive that remains inaccessible to its finding tools?" End quote. So this idea of what is beyond the archive, outside of the archive, is what interests me in returning to the Black and White Tree series. For it seems that the possibility of retrieving these photographic portraits in the present is to formulate relationships between their site of production and the formal, administrative and technical conditions of the archive that houses them. For the example of the process of finding the tree portraits referred to in the letter at Q, so these photographs here, it points to an impossibility that formulates all photographs. That is separating its content, so its subject matter, the tree, from its photographic representation, from the technical conditions that formulate the photograph itself. So as the photo historian and theorist Geoffrey Batchen states in his 2002 article, A Philosophical Window, photography is, quote, "a complex form of palimpsest. Nature, camera, image and photographer are all present, even when absent from the picture itself, as if photography represents a perverse dynamic in which each of these components is continually inscribed into the place of another." In his words, photography is neither cultural nor natural, but rather an economy that incorporates, produces, and is simultaneously produced by both nature and culture, both reality and representation, end quote. So this shifting economy of the tree, image, camera, photographic object, and how this is dealt with by the archive is of interest to me here. I'm particularly thinking about 19th century principle of provenance, as it assigns a place for archival material within the space of the archive, arranging archival material in a process of referral to the conditions under which they emerged, as opposed to simply based on their content. So this is thinking about a way in which photographs are arranged topographically rather than based on what words they refer to, or the subject that they are referring to. So it's always referring back to another place. And so for me, this other place is the space of the garden itself and the tree itself. So in the cases of the tree portraits spoken to here, I've suggested two possible uses for these photographs, that of the illustrative in Guilfoyle's book and that of correspondence between the Black and White Tree series. So this organisation in another place is itself complicated in the case of Guilfoyle's book. The publisher credits in the first page state that the photographs are by N.J. Kerr and the illustrations made by Patterson, Shug and Co. So Kerr, as many of you will know, is a well-known landscape photographer and indeed took many hundreds of photographs during his career, many of these trees. He also took quite formal photographs of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, but did Guilfoyle commission him to photograph the images for his book? Or does the inscription imply that Patterson, Shug and Co. made the illustrations, i.e. the tree portraits? It is clear that Kerr took the 5 formal Botanic Garden photographs, which are featured at the front of this book, and they are indeed separated out in the illustrations list itself. So a confusion is created here between the status of the photograph and the photograph as illustration. And I'm always led back here to a questioning of the conditions from which these photographs emerged. I somehow feel that it's much more complicated. I feel that as a condition from which these photographs emerged is a beyond the archive, as Speckler states. It is beyond our access in some way. And for me, at least, this is tied to the complicated dynamic of photography itself, as simultaneously nature and culture, reality and representation, and a dynamic which is further complicated by the tree itself. So for me, in my practice, the way to deal with this kind of idea of what is beyond the archive and what was missing from these photographs was a return to the site of the Botanic Garden itself, which I consider to be itself an archive and correspondence with these photographs. I don't have space to go into that today. So informing this return to the site of the garden is John Dixon Hunt's analysis of gardens focused on records of visitation. In his book, The Afterlife of Gardens, he proposes that a garden's reception through written and visual accounts should be included in the framework of a garden history and theory that had previously privileged the design or designers of gardens. So it is through a visitor's experience of the garden and these trees, arguably here, occurring across multiple temporalities, that Hunt develops an analysis of the reception of a garden, which is proposed to alter not only the history of gardens, but affecting an ongoing design, experience, and analysis of these gardens in the future. So Hunt, privileges the haptic, or the palpably haptic there, so that the garden is there to be experienced, and independent of our responses to it, this kind of experience on the site is altering from time to time. So, and furthermore, Hunt relates that no single experience of a garden can exhaust its full potential, rather that there is a double opportunity to recover this potential in an existing site through the accumulation of our own and others' visits and responses. So these photographic tree portraits provide one such opportunity, recovering potential trees that are photographed in the collection and proposing many more to be photographed. The Botanic Gardens is a specific location to which one can return to, and the longevity of the trees planted there points to the possibility of a continual return to what is missing in these archival photographs, the site of experience itself. So within my own work, I had an exhibition of this body of work in the Botanic Gardens in the Museum of Economic Botany. So I'll show you the images. This is kind of an installation shot. So this series, which is titled Locating the Tree, follows the footsteps of the original photographer of the black and white tree series, reproducing this collection. So I also showed the original collection as colour medium format, so 6 by 7 centimetre transparency, so they were analogue photographs. And there were photographs from Kew Botanic Gardens and the Adelaide Botanic Gardens. So I was interested here in how the viewer themselves becomes part of this process by extending this relationship into the actual site of the garden itself. So these photographs, as I said, were exhibited in the Museum of Economic Botany, which is located at the centre of the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site. And so the visitor was required to walk through the garden on the entry and exit from the exhibition. And so I was interested in how the photographs might inform and instruct that viewer in their own movement through the Adelaide Botanic Gardens site. And so I will just finish on another quote, just one last quote from French philosopher Jacques Derrida, and he informs a lot of my thinking and my practice, and although I acknowledge I haven't spoken about him today, he has a really great positioning of the archive as a question and responsibility for the future, and I felt that was quite relevant within this context. So the archive is not, I quote here, a question of the archive is not, I repeat, a question of the past. It is not a question of dealing with the past that might already be at our disposal or not at our disposal, an archivable concept of the archive. It is a question of the future itself, the question of a response and of a promise and of a responsibility for tomorrow. Thank you. I'll just quickly flag that Anna Foley has has put a proposal to me to go out and have a look at one of the trees, or the closest tree here that's on the National Trust Significant Register, which is across the road at RMIT. So she's going to lead a group of, she's just here at the front row, wave your hand, Anna. She's going to lead a group of us over to see a tree, so we might actually get some fresh air this afternoon. So I'll leave it there, thanks.